The sound of weeping carried across the mountain air like a wounded animal's cry, and Orson Fletcher stopped dead in his tracks, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle strapped across his broad back. It was June of 1878, and in the wilderness near the mining settlement of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, a woman's tears usually meant trouble of the worst kind. His massive frame tensed as he listened, trying to determine the direction. The creek. Someone was down by the water. Orson had spent the last 7 years living alone in these mountains, trapping beaver and hunting elk, his muscular arms grown thick from swinging an axe and hauling game. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite his isolation. At 28, he had seen enough of civilization to know he preferred the company of pine trees and eagles. But that sound, those broken sobs, stirred something in his chest he had thought long dead. He moved through the underbrush with surprising quiet for a man of his size, his powerful legs carrying him swiftly down the rocky slope. The June sun filtered through the canopy above, dappling the forest floor with golden light. As he rounded a bend in the path, he saw her. She sat on a flat rock beside the rushing creek, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with the force of her crying. Her dress was torn at the hem, covered in dust and what might have been blood. Dark auburn hair had come loose from its pins, cascading down her back in tangled waves. Even from a distance, Orson could see she was young, probably early 20s, and utterly devastated. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. A twig snapped under his boot and her head jerked up, eyes wide with fear. They were the color of creek water in summer, green with flecks of gold and currently red rimmed from crying. She scrambled backward on the rock, nearly falling into the water. "Easy," Orson said, his voice rough from disuse but gentle. He held up both hands, showing he meant no harm. "I am not going to hurt you." She stared at him, taking in his size, the rifle, the knife at his belt. Her breath came in short gasps, and he could see she was deciding whether to run. But something in her seemed to break again, and she just sat there, tears still streaming down her face. Without a word, Orson moved to the rock and sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. He did not ask questions. He did not demand explanations. He simply sat, his presence solid and steady as the mountains themselves, and waited. The creek rushed past them, cold and clear from the snowmelt higher up. Birds called from the trees. Somewhere in the distance a hawk screamed. And still, Orson sat beside this weeping stranger, patient as stone. Minutes passed. Then more. The sun moved across the sky, and gradually, the woman's sobs began to quiet. She hiccuped, wiped her face with her torn sleeve, and finally the tears stopped altogether. She sat there, staring at the water, exhausted. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "for not leaving." Orson nodded once. "You hurt?" She shook her head, then reconsidered. "Not the way you mean, nothing broken. You got a name, Caroline Preston." She glanced at him sideways. "You are not from the settlement." "No, I live up the mountain. Orson Fletcher." He gestured vaguely behind them. "Saw you from the ridge, heard you crying, figured you might need help." Caroline laughed, a bitter sound. "Help? Yes, I suppose I need that." She looked down at her hands, noticing they were shaking. "My father died 3 days ago, cholera. I buried him myself outside of town because nobody would help. They were too afraid of catching it. Then this morning, his business partner came to the house and told me my father had gambled away everything we owned. The house, the store, everything. He gave me 2 hours to get out." Orson's jaw tightened. "That is theft. It is legal, apparently. My father signed papers." She picked up a small stone and threw it into the creek. "I had nowhere to go. I started walking, just walked out of town with nothing but what I was wearing. I did not even know where I was going. I just needed to get away from all of it, all those people staring at me, pitying me. And then I got here and I just could not walk anymore. You got any family? Anyone you could send word to? Caroline shook her head. My mother died when I was 12. It was just my father and me. We came out here from Philadelphia 2 years ago, thought we would make our fortune in the mining supplies business. He was a good man, just unlucky. And now he is gone and I have nothing. Orson was quiet for a long moment, thinking. The smart thing would be to take her back to town, leave her with the church or some respectable family. That was what a civilized man would do. But looking at her face, seeing the devastation there, he could not imagine taking her back to the place that had caused her so much pain. I got a cabin, he said slowly. About 3 miles up the mountain. It is not much, but it is solid. Got food, a good well, plenty of firewood. You could stay there tonight, get your strength back, figure out what you want to do next. Caroline turned to look at him fully for the first time. He was enormous, this mountain man, with shoulders as wide as a door frame and arms thick with muscle. His face was weathered and tanned, with deep lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. But those eyes were kind, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, and when he looked at her, she did not see pity. She saw understanding. You do not know me, she said. Why would you help me? Orson stood, offering her his hand. Because you need help. And because nobody should be alone when they are hurting. She stared at his hand for a long moment, rough and calloused, strong enough to snap her wrist if he wanted. But she took it, and he pulled her gently to her feet. His grip was warm and steady, and for the first time since her father had died, Caroline felt something other than despair. She felt a tiny spark of hope. The walk up the mountain was difficult. Caroline's shoes, made for town streets, were not built for rocky trails. Twice she stumbled, and both times Orson caught her with one massive hand, steadying her. He moved slowly, matching her pace, pointing out roots and loose stones before she could trip over them. Watch here, he said, indicating a narrow section of path with a steep drop to one side. Stay close to the rock face. She did as he instructed, pressing herself against the stone as she edged along the trail. On the other side, the path widened again, and she let out a breath she had not known she was holding. You do this every day? She asked, slightly amazed. Usually faster, he admitted. But I am not usually escorting ladies. Despite everything, Caroline almost smiled. I imagine you do not get many visitors, none, not in 7 years, she blinked. 7 years, you have been alone up here for 7 years, mostly. Go into town a few times a year to trade furs, buy supplies I cannot make myself. Otherwise, yes, alone. He glanced back at her. Suits me. You not get lonely? Orson was quiet for several paces. Sometimes, he admitted, but lonely is better than some alternatives. Caroline wanted to ask what he meant, what had driven him into these mountains, but the look on his face suggested it was not a story for today. They walked on in silence, the only sounds their footsteps and the distant call of birds. The cabin appeared suddenly, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was larger than Caroline had expected, solidly built from hewn logs, with a stone chimney and real glass in the windows. A covered porch ran along the front, and she could see neat stacks of firewood under the eaves. Behind the cabin, a small barn and chicken coop stood in good repair. You built this yourself? She asked, stopping to stare. Over the years. Started with just one room, kept adding to it. He led her up the porch steps and pushed open the heavy wooden door. It is not fancy, but it keeps out the cold and the bears. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. The main room held a large fireplace with a cooking crane. a solid wooden table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies. Furs covered the floor and hung on the walls for insulation. Through a doorway, Caroline could see what looked like a bedroom. "You can have the bed," Orson said, following her gaze. "I will sleep out here. I cannot take your bed. You can and you will. You have been through enough." He moved to the fireplace and began building up the coals that still smoldered there. "You should clean up, rest. There is a pump outside for water, soap on the shelf there. I will heat some water for tea." Caroline stood in the middle of the room, feeling oddly out of place. This man, this stranger, was showing her more kindness than anyone in town had shown her in days. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. Orson straightened, looking at her with those clear blue eyes. "Because it is the right thing to do, and because I know what it feels like to lose everything." Before she could ask what he meant, he headed outside to the pump, leaving her alone in the cabin. Caroline looked around, taking in the details. Everything was neat, organized, well-maintained. This was not the home of a wild man or a savage. This was the home of someone who took pride in his work, who valued order and comfort. She found the soap and a clean cloth, washed her face and hands in the basin Orson filled for her. When she looked up, she caught sight of herself in a small mirror hanging on the wall and nearly gasped. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her hair a wild tangle, her dress torn and stained. She looked like a madwoman. Working quickly, she did what she could to make herself presentable, washing away the grime, trying to pin up her hair with the few pins she could find still attached to it. The dress was beyond help, but at least she was clean. When Orson came back inside with fresh water, he found her sitting at the table, hands folded in her lap, looking lost. He poured water into a kettle and hung it over the fire, then pulled some dried meat and bread from his stores. "You should eat," he said, setting the food in front of her. Caroline realized she was starving. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. She tore into the bread, trying to maintain some dignity but too hungry to care much. Orson watched her for a moment, then busied himself making tea. They ate in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. There was something peaceful about this cabin, this mountain man who spoke little but seemed to understand so much. When the tea was ready, he poured her a cup, and she wrapped her hands around it gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her bones. "What was your father like?" Orson asked after a while. Caroline smiled, a real smile this time, though it was tinged with sadness. "He was wonderful, optimistic to a fault. Always believed the next venture would be the one that made us rich. He was terrible with money but wonderful with people. Everyone liked him." Her smile faded. Maybe that was the problem. He was too trusting, too willing to believe the best in people. His partner, the one who took everything, my father thought they were friends. "Some men got no honor," Orson said quietly. "No, I suppose not." She sipped her tea. "What about you? You said you lost everything too." Orson was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Had a wife once, a little place down near Bozeman. I was a blacksmith making good money. She was expecting our first child." He paused, staring into his cup. "There was a raid. Outlaws looking for gold from the mining payroll. They thought I had money hidden. I was at the forge when they came. By the time I got to the house, they had already gone. She was gone too." Caroline's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God, I am so sorry." "Doctors tried to save the baby, but it was too late. Lost them both in one day." His jaw worked. "I hunted those men down. Took me 6 months, but I found every one of them. Law was too slow, too weak. I handled it myself." She should have been frightened by this confession, by the darkness in his voice. But instead, she just felt sad for him, for the pain he had carried alone for so long. "Is that why you came up here? After I was done, I could not stand being around people anymore." Could not stand the noise, the crowds, the constant reminder of what I had lost. So I came up here, built this place, and stayed. He looked up at her. Been alone ever since, until today. Do you regret it? Living alone, he considered the question. Sometimes, but it is safe up here. Quiet. Nobody can hurt you if you keep yourself apart. That is no way to live, Caroline said softly. Maybe not, but it is the way I have been living. He stood, collecting their empty dishes. You should rest now. Tomorrow we can talk about what you want to do, where you want to go. Caroline wanted to protest that she was fine, but exhaustion hit her like a physical weight. She nodded, standing on shaky legs. Orson showed her to the bedroom, which was simple but comfortable, with a real bed frame and a thick mattress stuffed with pine needles and furs. If you need anything, I will be right outside, he said. Thank you, Orson, for everything. He nodded and closed the door gently behind him, leaving her alone. Caroline sat on the edge of the bed, then slowly lay back. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable, and the room smelled of pine and wood smoke. Through the small window, she could see the tops of the trees, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. She thought she would lie awake for hours, thinking about her father, about everything she had lost. But the mountain air and her exhaustion worked together, and within minutes, she was asleep. In the main room, Orson built up the fire and laid out his bedroll on the floor. He was used to sleeping on hard surfaces, but tonight, the floor seemed particularly uncomfortable. It was not the physical discomfort that bothered him, though. It was the strange feeling in his chest, the awareness that there was another person in his home, someone depending on him. He had meant what he said about being alone. After losing Mary and the baby, he had shut down that part of himself, the part that connected with other people, that cared and hoped and loved. It had been easier that way, safer. But sitting by that creek today, watching Caroline cry, something had shifted. He had felt that old protective instinct rise up, stronger than it had been in years. She was beautiful, even tear-stained and grief-stricken. But it was not just her looks that had drawn him. It was the strength he saw in her, the fact that she had buried her own father, walked away from everything she knew, and was still somehow standing. That took courage. Orson stared up at the ceiling beams, watching shadows dance in the firelight. He told himself he would help her get back on her feet, maybe find her passage to somewhere she had family or opportunities. Then she would leave, and he would return to his solitary life. That was the plan. But already, he knew it would not be that simple. The next morning, Caroline woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment she forgot where she was and panic seized her. Then she remembered. The creek, the mountain man, the cabin. She sat up, smoothing her hair as best she could, and ventured out into the main room. Orson stood at the fireplace, tending a pan over the flames. He had tied his long hair back, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, exposing powerful forearms corded with muscle. He looked over when he heard her. "Morning," he said. "Hope you are hungry." "Starving, actually." She moved to the table, sitting in the same chair as last night. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough." He brought over 2 plates loaded with bacon, eggs, and fried bread. "Coffee, please." They ate together, and Caroline marveled at how comfortable this felt. She had known this man for less than a day, yet sitting across from him felt natural, easy. Maybe it was because he did not demand anything from her, did not expect her to be anything other than what she was. "I have been thinking," Orson said, setting down his fork, "about your situation." "I have been trying not to," Caroline admitted. "I understand that, but we need to talk about it eventually. You got any plans? Anywhere you could go?" She shook her head. "Not really. I have some distant cousins back in Philadelphia, but we have not spoken in years. I would not even know how to contact them, and I have no money for train fare anyway." What about work? You got skills. I can read and write, do figures. I helped my father with the store's books. I can cook, so the usual things women are supposed to know. She sighed. But finding work in Silver Creek is not going to happen. That town has made it clear what they think of me. Orson drummed his fingers on the table, thinking. What if you stayed here for a while? Caroline looked up sharply. What? Just until you figure things out, he said quickly. I am not suggesting anything improper. You keep the bedroom, I sleep out here. But winter is still a ways off. You could stay through the summer, help out around here, and I could teach you some skills that might help you make your way. Hunting, trapping, survival. Then when you are ready, you can decide what you want to do. You want me to stay here, with you. It is not about what I want, it is about what makes sense. You got nowhere to go, no money, I got space and supplies. And honestly, I could use the help. Garden needs tending, chickens need feeding, lot of work around here for one person. Caroline stared at him, trying to read his intentions, but his face was open, honest. He really was just trying to help. People in town would talk, she said. When have you ever seen me in town? When would I care what people say? He leaned forward. Look, Caroline, you have been dealt a terrible hand, but you do not have to play it alone. Let me help you. Let this be a place where you can catch your breath, figure out who you want to be now. She wanted to say no. The proper thing would be to refuse, to find some other way. But the truth was, she had no other way. And more than that, she did not want to leave. Something about this place, this man, felt right in a way nothing had felt right in a long time. All right, she said quietly. I will stay. For the summer, and I will work for my keep. I will not be a burden. Never thought you would be, Orson said, and the relief in his voice was unmistakable. That day he showed her around the property. The garden was larger than she expected, with neat rows of vegetables, herbs, and even some flowers. The chickens were fat and healthy, clucking contentedly in their coop. The barn held his horse, a sturdy gelding named Thunder, and an impressive collection of tools, all well maintained. You are very organized for a mountain man, Caroline observed. Survival depends on it, he said. You let things get messy, chaotic, something important gets lost or forgotten. Up here, that can mean the difference between life and death. He showed her how to collect eggs, how to feed the chickens, where the best herbs grew for cooking and medicine. He pointed out animal tracks and taught her to identify which were dangerous and which were harmless. His hands were gentle when he guided her, patient when she made mistakes. You are a good teacher, she said at one point. Had to learn most of this myself, he replied. Made plenty of mistakes. Seems a waste not to pass on what I have figured out. That evening, Caroline insisted on cooking dinner. She made a stew from the vegetables and dried meat, seasoning it with herbs from the garden. It was simple fare, but Orson ate 2 bowls and looked pleased. Been a long time since I had a meal I did not cook myself, he said. This is good. My mother taught me. She said a good meal could solve half the world's problems. Smart woman. They fell into a routine over the next few days. Caroline woke early, fed the chickens, collected eggs, and tended the garden. Orson went out to check his trap lines and hunt, usually returning by mid-afternoon with game to process. They would work together in the evenings, him teaching her how to skin and prepare the animals, her teaching him songs she remembered from her childhood. It was strange how quickly it felt normal, having her there. Orson found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin, knowing Caroline would be there. He liked hearing her humming as she worked, liked the way she laughed when he told her stories about his more disastrous attempts at mountain living. For her part, Caroline felt herself slowly healing. The constant ache of grief was still there, but it was not as sharp as it had been. She thought about her father often, but instead of crying, She found herself remembering the good times, the way he used to tell terrible jokes, the pride in his eyes when she helped him with the store. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after she had arrived, Caroline was working in the garden when she heard thunder neigh in alarm. She looked up to see 3 men on horses riding into the clearing. Her blood went cold. She recognized one of them from town, a rough man named Jake Carter who had always made her uncomfortable with the way he looked at her. "Well, well," Carter said, dismounting. "Heard a rumor there was a woman up here with the mountain man. Did not believe it until now." Caroline straightened, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to leave. You are trespassing." "Trespassing?" One of the other men laughed. "On what? This is public land, sweetheart." "Actually, it is not," Orson's voice came from the tree line. He emerged from the forest, his rifle held casually but ready. "I filed a claim on this land 4 years ago. It is mine, and you are trespassing." Carter's hand moved toward his pistol, but Orson's rifle came up faster. "I would not," Orson said, his voice deadly calm. "I can drop all 3 of you before any of you clear leather." The 3 men looked at each other, reassessing. Orson was massive, and they had all heard stories about what he had done to the men who killed his wife. Nobody wanted to test him. "We are just here to check on Miss Preston," Carter said, trying to sound reasonable. "People in town are worried about her, living up here alone with you." "I am fine," Caroline said firmly. "And I am not alone. This is my choice." "Your choice to live in sin with a man you are not married to." The 3rd man sneered. "Your father would be ashamed." Caroline's face went white with anger. "Do not you dare speak about my father. None of you would even help me bury him. You have no right to judge me now." "Easy, Caroline," Orson said quietly, though his eyes never left the men. "They are leaving. Now." "Listen, Fletcher," Carter said, "we do not want trouble. But a young woman living up here with you, people are going to talk. It is not right." "What is not right," Orson said, his voice hard as iron, "is you coming onto my land, threatening a woman under my protection. Now I am going to count to 10, and if you are not on your horses and riding away, I am going to start shooting. 1. The men mounted quickly, muttering among themselves. But as they rode off, Carter called back, "This is not over, Fletcher. People are not going to stand for this." When they were gone, Caroline sank down onto the ground, shaking. Orson lowered his rifle and came to her side, kneeling beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I have brought trouble to you." "You have not brought anything but good to this place," he said firmly. "Those men are fools and cowards. Do not give them another thought." But Caroline could not stop thinking about it. That night she sat at the table, barely touching her dinner. Finally she spoke. "Maybe I should go. I do not want to cause problems for you." Orson set down his fork. "Is that what you want, to leave?" She looked around the cabin at the home it had become in such a short time. "No," she admitted, "but I do not want to ruin your life either. What if they come back? What if they try to cause real trouble? Let them try." His jaw was set. "I am not afraid of them. But your reputation in town. If people think I am living here improperly, they might stop trading with you, might cause problems when you need supplies." Orson was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There is a solution, if you are willing." "What solution?" He looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious. "We could get married." Caroline's mouth fell open. "What? Think about it. If we are married, nobody can say anything. You would be protected, have a legal home here. And I would have a wife, which honestly might make my life easier in some ways." He paused. "I am not talking about a real marriage if you do not want that, just on paper. We could keep living like we are now." "Orson, that is crazy, maybe, but it makes sense." He leaned forward. "Caroline, I know this is sudden. I know we have only known each other a few weeks. But I feel like I have known you longer, and I do not want you to leave. I like having you here. I like who I am when you are around." Her heart was pounding. "I like being here too," she admitted. "I like you. But marriage is a big step, even if it is just on paper." "I know. And if you say no, I will understand. We will figure out something else, but I want you to know the offer is genuine. I would be honored to call you my wife." Caroline looked at this man, this gentle giant who had found her crying by a creek and sat beside her until the tears stopped. He had given her shelter, taught her skills, made her laugh again. He had protected her without asking for anything in return. And when she looked at him, she felt something she had not expected to feel again. Hope, and maybe something more than hope. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need." That night, Caroline lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Marriage to Orson. It seemed impossible, impractical. They barely knew each other. And yet, she knew him in ways that mattered. She knew he was kind and patient. She knew he was strong and protective. She knew he made her feel safe in a way she had never felt safe before. And if she was honest with herself, she knew that what she felt for him was more than gratitude. When he smiled at her, her heart beat faster. When his hand brushed hers, she felt warmth spread through her body. When he spoke in that low, rumbling voice, she wanted to listen forever. But did he feel the same? He had said it could be a marriage on paper only. Did that mean he did not want a real marriage? Or was he just being respectful, giving her an option Caroline realized she needed to know? She got up, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and walked into the main room. Orson was still awake, sitting by the fire staring into the flames. "Could not sleep?" he asked when he saw her. "I need to ask you something," she said, sitting across from him. "And I need you to be honest. Always am. When you said we could get married, did you mean it would only be on paper? Or did you mean it could be more than that?" Orson looked at her for a long moment, the firelight flickering across his strong features. "I meant it could be whatever you wanted it to be," he said finally. "If you just want protection and a home, I would give you that. If you wanted more, I would give you that too." "What do you want?" His voice was low, intense. "I want you to be happy. I want you to feel safe. And I want you to stay, Caroline. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you want to be." He paused. "As for the rest, I will not lie to you. When I look at you, I do not just see someone I am helping. I see a woman I admire, someone strong and brave and beautiful. If you wanted a real marriage with everything that means, I would count myself the luckiest man alive." Caroline's breath caught. "You mean that?" Every word. She stood, moving around the fire to sit beside him. "I want to stay," she said softly. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because being here with you is the first time I have felt truly alive in years. My father was wonderful, but he was always dreaming of the next thing, never happy with where we were. You are different. You are solid and real and present. And when I am with you, I feel like I am enough, just as I am." Orson reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her face, rough and warm. "You are more than enough," he said. "You are everything." She leaned into his touch. Then slowly, carefully, she kissed him. It was tentative at first, questioning. But Orson responded immediately, his arms coming around her, pulling her close. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and grief falling away, replaced by something bright and new and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Orson rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his voice rough. Caroline laughed, a real laugh full of joy. "Yes, I will marry you, Orson Fletcher, for real, not just on paper." He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. When he lifted her in his powerful arms and carried her toward the bedroom, she did not protest. This was her choice, her decision, her future, and it was good. The next morning they rode into Silver Creek together. Caroline sat in front of Orson on Thunder, his strong arms around her, and she felt no fear. Let people stare. Let them talk. She knew her own heart, and that was enough. They went straight to the small church, where Reverend Thomas looked surprised to see them. "Miss Preston," he said, then noticed Orson behind her. "And Mr. Fletcher, what brings you both here?" "We want to get married," Caroline said firmly. "Today, if possible." The Reverend's eyebrows shot up. "Today? But surely you need time to plan, to post the banns, to prepare." "No," Orson said. "We do not need any of that. We need to be married. Can you do it or not?" The Reverend looked between them, seeing something in their faces that made him nod slowly. "I suppose I can. Do you have witnesses?" "I will find some," Caroline said. She stepped outside and saw Mrs. Henderson, one of the few women from town who had been kind after her father's death, walking past. "Mrs. Henderson, could you spare a few minutes? We need a witness." The older woman hurried over, curious. When she learned what was happening, she smiled warmly. "Of course, dear. I am happy for you." She called to her husband, who was loading supplies into their wagon, and he came over as well. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with its rough wooden pews and plain altar. Caroline had no fancy dress, just the best of the few things Orson had given her. But when Orson took her hand and repeated his vows in that deep, steady voice, she felt like the most beautiful woman in the world. "I, Orson Fletcher, take you, Caroline Preston, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect you, provide for you, and love you for all my days." When it was her turn, Caroline's voice was strong and clear. "I, Caroline Preston, take you, Orson Fletcher, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you, support you, and love you for all my days." They had no rings, but it did not matter. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Orson leaned down to kiss her, Caroline felt like she had finally come home. Word spread through town quickly. By the time they left the church, a small crowd had gathered. Some looked approving, others scandalized. Jake Carter stood near the saloon, glowering, but he did not approach. "Let them talk," Orson murmured in her ear as they walked to Thunder. "You are mine now, and I am yours. Nothing else matters." They rode back up the mountain as husband and wife, and if Caroline leaned back against Orson's broad chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, well, that was her right now. The days that followed were some of the happiest of Caroline's life. She and Orson settled into their new reality, no longer maintaining separate spaces but truly sharing the cabin as husband and wife. Orson moved his things into the bedroom, and Caroline found she loved falling asleep in his arms, loved waking up to his presence beside her. They worked together during the days, maintaining the property, hunting and foraging. Orson continued teaching her survival skills, pleased with how quickly she learned. Caroline proved to have a steady hand and a good eye, managing to bring down her first deer with Orson's patient coaching. "You are a natural," he said, pride evident in his voice as he helped her field dress the animal. "Most people get too excited, too nervous, but you stayed calm, took your time." "I had a good teacher," she said, smiling up at him. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Orson told her stories about his life before the mountains, about his childhood in Ohio, about learning blacksmithing from his father. Caroline told him about Philadelphia, about her mother's garden, about the books she used to love reading. "I miss books," she admitted one night. "That is one thing about town life I do miss. The library, being able to read whenever I wanted." "What kind of books?" Orson asked. "Everything. Poetry, novels, histories. I used to imagine I was living in those stories, having adventures." The next time Orson went into town for supplies, he came back with a surprise. He had traded some of his best furs for a stack of books from the general store. "They are not new," he said as Caroline unwrapped them, her eyes going wide with delight. "And the selection was limited, but I thought you might like them." There were 6 books, 2 novels, a collection of poetry, a history of the West, and 2 practical guides on herbs and frontier medicine. Caroline threw her arms around him, kissing him soundly. "This is the most thoughtful thing anyone has ever done for me," she said. "It made you smile," he said simply. "That is worth more than any furs." As summer progressed, Caroline bloomed. The sadness that had haunted her eyes when Orson first found her slowly faded, replaced by contentment and joy. She grew stronger physically too, her body adapting to the physical demands of mountain life. Her hands, once soft, developed calluses. Her arms grew toned from chopping wood and hauling water, but it was not just physical strength she was gaining. She was discovering who she was when she was not trying to fit into society's expectations. Up here, she did not have to be prim and proper, did not have to worry about saying the wrong thing or wearing the right dress. She could just be Caroline, and that was enough. One particularly hot afternoon in July, she and Orson took a break from their work to swim in the creek. It was the same creek where he had found her crying, but now it held different memories. They splashed and played like children, and when Orson caught her in his arms, water streaming down his muscular chest, Caroline felt a rush of love so intense it almost hurt. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Neither did I," he admitted. "After I lost Mary and the baby, I thought I was done with happiness. I thought I had used up my chance at it." He brushed wet hair from her face. "But then I found you crying by this creek and everything changed." "You think she would mind?" Caroline asked quietly. "Your first wife. Do you think she would mind that you found someone else?" Orson considered the question seriously. "Mary was the kindest person I ever knew. If she could see us now, I think she would be happy I found my way back to living instead of just surviving, and I think she would have liked you. I wish I could have known her." "In a way, you are honoring her memory," Orson said. "She always told me I was too serious, that I needed to remember how to laugh. You have taught me that again." They stayed in the creek until the sun began to set, then walked back to the cabin hand in hand, comfortable in each other's company. But not everything was perfect. About a month after their marriage, trouble came calling again. This time it was not Jake Carter and his friends. It was the law. Sheriff Dawson rode up to the cabin one morning, his face grave. Caroline saw him first and called to Orson, who came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sheriff," Orson said neutrally, "what brings you up here?" "Need to talk to you, Fletcher, both of you." The sheriff dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "Can we go inside?" They gathered around the table, tension thick in the air. Dawson removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I am going to be straight with you," he said. "There are people in town making noise about your marriage, saying it is not proper that Miss Preston, excuse me, Mrs. Fletcher, was coerced." "That is ridiculous," Caroline said immediately. "I married Orson of my own free will. Nobody coerced me into anything." "I believe you," Dawson said, "but there are other concerns. Your father's business partner, Silas Montgomery, he is claiming you should not have been allowed to marry without his permission." "His permission?" Caroline's voice rose. "He has no authority over me. He is not my family. He says your father owed him money, and that you, as your father's heir, are responsible for that debt. He has filed a claim saying that until the debt is settled, you should be considered under his guardianship." Orson's face darkened. "That is the biggest load of nonsense I have ever heard. She is a grown woman, 22 years old. She does not need anyone's guardianship." "I agree," Dawson said. "And legally, I do not think his claim holds water. But he has got some of the town council on his side, and they are pushing for an investigation." "An investigation into what?" Caroline demanded. "Into whether your marriage is legitimate. Whether it was entered into freely, or whether Fletcher here used his isolation and your vulnerable state to force you into it." Caroline stood so fast her chair scraped across the floor. "Sheriff, I am going to say this once, and I want you to remember it clearly so you can tell everyone in that town. Orson Fletcher is the best man I have ever known. He found me at my lowest point and helped me without asking for anything in return. He offered me marriage to protect me from gossip and judgment, and I accepted because I wanted to, because I love him. There was no coercion, no force, nothing improper. We are legally married, and if Silas Montgomery or anyone else has a problem with that, they can come tell me to my face." Dawson held up his hands. "I am not questioning you, Mrs. Fletcher. I just needed to hear it from you directly." He looked at Orson. "For what it is worth, I think Montgomery is a snake. He has been circling your father's assets like a vulture, claiming all sorts of debts that nobody can verify. I think he is angry that you got married because now he can't try to force you into marrying him." "What?" Caroline and Orson said simultaneously. "You did not know. He has been telling people he was planning to propose to you, that you had an understanding." Caroline felt sick. "We had no such thing. He barely spoke to me before my father died, and after he just wanted to take everything we owned." "Well, he is certainly interested now," Dawson said, "and he has enough influence in town to make trouble." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "My advice: lay low for a while. Do not give anyone ammunition to use against you. I will do what I can to shut down Montgomery's claims, but it might take time." After the sheriff left, Caroline paced the cabin, furious. "How dare they?" she said. "How dare they question our marriage, question my choices? I am so tired of men thinking they have the right to control my life." Orson watched her, his face thoughtful. "Montgomery wants you," he said. "Or more accurately, he wants what marrying you would give him: a respectable wife, a claim to your father's business, social standing. He can want all he likes. I am married to you, I know, and that is what is eating at him." Orson moved to her, taking her hands. "Caroline, I need you to understand something. If staying married to me is going to cause you problems, if it is going to make your life harder, we could get it annulled. I would hate it, but I would do it if it meant protecting you." Caroline looked up at him, at this massive, powerful man who was offering to give up his own happiness for hers. "You are an idiot," she said, but her voice was tender. "I am not getting our marriage annulled. I am not going anywhere. Montgomery can scream and shout all he wants. I am your wife, and that is final." Orson pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I love you," he said, the words rough but sincere. "I have been trying not to say it, trying not to push, but I love you, Caroline, more than I thought I could love anyone again." "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "So much it scares me sometimes." They stood there, holding each other, drawing strength from their bond. Whatever challenges came, they would face them together. But Montgomery was not done. 2 weeks later, he showed up at the cabin himself, accompanied by 2 men Caroline did not recognize. Orson was out checking the trap lines, and Caroline was alone, working in the garden. "Mrs. Fletcher," Montgomery said, dismounting. He was a thin man with a pointed face and cold eyes. "Or should I still call you Miss Preston, Mrs.?" "Fletcher will do," Caroline said, standing and wiping dirt from her hands. She wished desperately that Orson was here. "What do you want, Mr. Montgomery? I came to make you an offer. A generous one." He pulled a document from his coat pocket. "If you agree to an annulment of your marriage to Fletcher, I will forgive all of your father's debts and return half of the business assets to you." "There were no debts," Caroline said. "You stole everything using fraudulent papers, and we both know it." Montgomery's smile did not reach his eyes. "That is a serious accusation. Can you prove it? My father would never have gambled away our home. He loved that house." "Love does not pay bills, my dear. Your father was in deep, and when he died, those debts became your responsibility. Unless, of course, you want to make other arrangements." He stepped closer. "Marry me instead, Caroline. I can give you everything you have lost and more. A proper home, standing in society, security. I have all of that with Orson. You have a cabin in the woods and a man who will never be more than a trapper. Is that really the life you want? You were meant for better things." "I choose my own life," Caroline said firmly, "and I have chosen Orson. Now please leave. You are not welcome here." Montgomery's expression hardened. "You are making a mistake. I have friends in territorial government connections. I can make things very difficult for you and your so-called husband." "Is that a threat?" Orson's voice came from behind Montgomery, and the man spun around to find himself facing the mountain man, who had emerged silently from the tree line. Orson's rifle was in his hands and his face was hard as granite. "Fletcher," Montgomery said, trying to recover his composure, "I was just speaking with your wife. I heard what you were saying. Now I am going to make myself clear. My wife has asked you to leave. So you are going to get on your horse, ride out of here, and never come back. And if you try any legal tricks or use your connections to cause trouble for us, I will make sure everyone knows about those fraudulent papers you used to steal from a dead man. You have no proof of that. Do not I?" Orson pulled a folded paper from his own pocket. "When I was in town last week, I did some asking around. Turns out your witness to those debt papers, one Mr. Harrison, does not actually exist. No birth record, no property, nothing. Just a name you made up to make your theft look legal." Montgomery's face went white, then red. "You cannot prove that. Maybe not in court, but I can tell everyone in town and let them decide whether they want to do business with a fraud. I can also mention how you are harassing my wife, trying to force her into an annulment. Wonder how that will look to your respectable friends." The two men with Montgomery had been watching this exchange nervously. Now one of them spoke up. "Mr. Montgomery, maybe we should go." Montgomery stared at Orson for a long moment, hatred burning in his eyes. Then he mounted his horse. "This is not over," he said. "Yes," Orson replied calmly, "it is." They watched the three men ride away, and only when they were out of sight did Caroline let out the breath she had been holding. "How did you know about Harrison?" "I did not for sure. But when the sheriff mentioned Montgomery's claims, I got suspicious. Went to the county office, looked at the papers. The signature looked wrong, too perfect. So I asked around, and sure enough, nobody has ever heard of this witness." He looked down at her. "I wanted to have something we could use if he pushed too hard." Caroline threw her arms around him. "You are brilliant." "I am protective," he corrected. "There is a difference." He held her close. "But I meant what I said. This is over. He cannot touch you now, not without exposing himself." And Orson was right. Word of his discoveries spread through town, and Montgomery's support crumbled. An investigation was launched, and it was discovered that he had forged several documents, not just the ones related to Caroline's father. By the end of August, he had fled the territory, and Caroline received a letter from the sheriff informing her that her father's assets, what was left of them, were being returned to her. "I do not want any of it," she told Orson. "The house, the store, all of it is tainted with bad memories." "Then sell it," Orson suggested. "Use the money for something that matters to you." Caroline thought about it and eventually did sell, getting a fair price. She used part of the money to commission a beautiful headstone for her father's grave, carved with his name and the words "Beloved Father, forever remembered." She donated another portion to the church for their charity work. The rest she saved, knowing it might come in useful someday. Summer faded into autumn, and the mountains burst into color. Caroline had never seen anything so beautiful as the aspen groves turning gold against the dark green pines. She and Orson spent their days preparing for winter, cutting and stacking firewood, preserving meat, harvesting the last of the garden produce. First winter in the mountains can be hard, Orson warned her. It gets cold, really cold, and we will be snowed in for weeks at a time. As long as I am with you, I can handle anything, Caroline said. He smiled, pulling her close. I am glad you feel that way, because once the snow starts, there is no leaving until spring. The first real snow came in late October, a light dusting that made everything look magical. Caroline stood on the porch, watching fat flakes drift down, and felt profoundly at peace. This was her home now, her life. She had lost so much, but she had gained so much more. That night, as she lay in Orson's arms, she said, "I want to tell you something." "What is it?" he asked, running his fingers through her hair. "I think I might be pregnant." Orson went very still, then he pulled back to look at her face. "Are you sure?" "Not completely. But I have missed my monthly courses and I have been feeling different, tired, a little nauseous in the mornings." She searched his face anxiously. "Is that all right? I know we have not talked about children, and after what happened to you before, I understand if you are scared." Orson's eyes were bright, and to her surprise, she realized he was fighting tears. "Scared does not begin to cover it," he admitted. "The thought of losing you, of losing a child again, terrifies me. But Caroline, if you are carrying our baby, that is the greatest gift you could give me. A chance to be a father, to build the family I lost. We will get through it together," she promised. "Both of us, watching out for each other." As winter closed in, Caroline's pregnancy became more apparent. She had to let out her dresses, and Orson treated her like she was made of glass, constantly worrying that she was doing too much. "I am pregnant, not broken," she said, laughing at his hovering. "I can still carry water." "Let me do it," he insisted. "You should rest." "I have been resting. I am going to go crazy if you keep treating me like an invalid." They found a balance eventually, Caroline doing what she could while Orson took on the heavier tasks. The cabin, which had seemed spacious enough for two, suddenly felt small with all the preparations for a baby. Orson spent his spare time building a cradle, his big hands surprisingly delicate as he carved designs into the wood. "My father taught me that," he said when Caroline admired his work. "He used to say that anything worth making is worth making beautiful." Winter was hard, as Orson had predicted. The snow piled up to the windows, and for weeks they saw no one but each other. But Caroline found she did not mind. The cabin was warm and cozy, and she loved these quiet days with Orson, reading by the fire, cooking together, talking about their future. "What do you want to name the baby?" she asked one evening. "If it is a boy, maybe Samuel, after my father. What about you?" "If it is a girl, I would like to name her Mary, after your first wife." Orson looked at her in surprise. "You would do that? She was part of your life, part of what made you who you are. I would like to honor that." He kissed her then, long and tender. "You are an amazing woman, Caroline Fletcher." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers. Caroline, now heavily pregnant, waddled more than walked, but she insisted on helping Orson plant the garden. "The baby could come any day now," Orson fretted. "You should be resting." "The baby will come when it is ready," Caroline said serenely. "And I want to plant these seeds. Our child should see that life keeps going, keeps growing." She went into labor on a beautiful May morning, with birds singing in the trees and sunshine streaming through the windows. Orson had ridden to town the week before to bring back the midwife, Mrs. Henderson, who had agreed to stay at the cabin until the baby came. "First babies take their time," Mrs. Henderson said calmly as Caroline's contractions started. "Could be hours yet." It was hours, long and painful hours. Orson stayed by Caroline's side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. He was terrified. Caroline could see it in his eyes, but he never wavered. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You are the strongest person I know." As the sun began to set, painting the cabin in golden light, Caroline gave one final push, and their baby entered the world with a loud, indignant cry. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. "A big, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Caroline's arms, and both parents stared down at him in wonder. He had a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. His little face was red and wrinkled, and he was the most beautiful thing Caroline had ever seen. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Orson could not speak. Tears ran down his face as he looked at his wife and son, this miracle he had never thought he would have. When he finally found his voice, all he could say was, "Thank you for giving me this." "We did this together," Caroline said, reaching up to touch his face. "This is our miracle." Mrs. Henderson stayed for a few more days, making sure both mother and baby were doing well. Then she rode back to town with the news, and soon the whole settlement knew that the mountain man and his wife had a son. Life fell into a new rhythm after that, centered around the tiny person who demanded constant attention. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he had powerful lungs and was not shy about using them. Orson proved to be a natural father, his big hands gentle as he changed diapers and rocked the baby to sleep. "I thought I had forgotten how to do this," he admitted one night, holding Samuel against his broad chest. "But it comes back, like riding a horse." "You are wonderful with him," Caroline said, watching them with love in her eyes. "He is lucky to have you as a father." As Samuel grew, the cabin rang with his laughter and occasional cries. He was a curious child, always getting into things, always exploring. Orson built a fence around the porch so Samuel could play safely outside, and Caroline sewed little clothes and made toys from scraps of fabric and wood. The years passed in a blur of happiness. When Samuel was 3, Caroline became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Mary, as Caroline had wanted, and if Orson cried when he held his daughter for the first time, nobody mentioned it. Mary had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes, and she was quieter than her brother, content to sit and observe the world around her. Samuel adored her, appointing himself her protector and playmate. "Just like her father," Caroline said, watching Orson with their children. "Always protecting, always caring." "I learned from the best," Orson said, pulling her close. "You taught me that it is okay to love again, to hope again. Everything good in my life came from the day I found you crying by the creek." "And you taught me that strength is not about never falling apart," Caroline replied. "It is about having someone who will sit with you until you are ready to stand again." They had 3 more children over the years, another boy, Jacob, and twin girls, Emma and Elizabeth. The cabin had to be expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, and the once quiet mountain home was now filled with noise and laughter and life. Orson taught all his children the skills he had taught Caroline: how to hunt, track, survive in the wilderness. But he also taught them kindness, patience, and the importance of helping those in need. Caroline taught them to read and write, filled their heads with stories, and made sure they knew they were loved beyond measure. The people of Silver Creek, who had once gossiped about the mountain man and his wife, came to respect the Fletcher family. Orson and Caroline would bring the children to town a few times a year, and they were always greeted warmly. The children, wild and free from their mountain upbringing, charmed everyone they met. When Samuel turned 16, he told his parents he wanted to learn blacksmithing. "Like you used to do, Pa," he said. "I want to learn the trade." Orson arranged for him to apprentice with the blacksmith in Silver Creek, and watching his son ride off to start his own path brought tears to his eyes. "They grow up so fast," he said to Caroline. "They do," she agreed. "But we raised them well. They will be fine." And they were. Samuel became a skilled blacksmith and eventually took over the business in Silver Creek. Mary married a teacher who had come west to start a school, and they settled in Helena. Jacob became a ranger, protecting the wilderness his father loved. The twins, inseparable as always, opened a successful dress shop together. As the years turned to decades, Orson and Caroline grew old together in their mountain home. His hair turned gray, then white, and his beard grew long. Caroline's auburn hair silvered, and lines appeared around her eyes and mouth, lines from years of smiling. But their love never faded. If anything, it grew deeper, richer, more precious with each passing year. On their 50th wedding anniversary, all their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. The clearing was filled with tents and laughter, with the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread. Orson, now 78 but still strong, stood with Caroline beside him and looked at the family they had built. 50 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, "I found your grandmother crying by a creek. I sat down beside her, not knowing what else to do, and waited. I had no idea that moment would change my life, would give me everything I have now. But it did, because she taught me that love is not something you lose and never find again. It is something that finds you when you need it most." Caroline, 72 and still beautiful in his eyes, squeezed his hand. "And he taught me that rock bottom is not the end. It is just the place where you build your foundation. Everything we have, everything we are, started from that moment by the creek." Their children and grandchildren cheered, raising glasses in toast. And later, when the party had wound down and everyone had gone to sleep in their tents, Orson and Caroline sat on their porch, watching the stars. "You ever regret it?" Orson asked. "Choosing this life, staying with me instead of going back to civilization," Caroline laughed. "Never, not for a single moment. This life, this love, our family, it is everything I never knew I needed. You saved me that day by the creek, Orson, but I think I saved you too." "You did," he agreed. "You brought me back to life." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they had for 50 years. The mountain air was cool and sweet, filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. It was peaceful, perfect. "I love you," Caroline said, as she had said thousands of times before. "I love you too," Orson replied, as he always would. Several more years passed in gentle contentment. They slowed down as age demanded, but they never stopped living. Orson still checked his trap lines, though not as far or as often. Caroline still tended her garden, though she needed help with the heavier work. Their children and grandchildren visited often, filling the cabin with love and noise. Orson passed first in his sleep, at the age of 84. He simply did not wake up one spring morning, his hand still holding Caroline's. The doctor said his heart had just worn out, that he had lived a long, full life. Caroline, devastated but grateful for every moment they had shared, arranged his burial on a hillside overlooking the cabin, where he could see the mountains he loved forever. She lived 2 more years after that, surrounded by family, still telling stories about the mountain man who had found her crying by a creek and changed her life. She passed quietly on a summer evening with her children around her, and they buried her beside Orson, together even in death. On their shared headstone, their children carved the words, "Here lie Orson and Caroline Fletcher. He found her by a creek and stayed until the tears stopped. They stayed together forever after." The cabin still stands, maintained by their descendants, a testament to the love that bloomed in the wilderness. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, people swear they can hear laughter from the porch, the sound of a man's deep voice and a woman's joyful reply, as if somewhere in the mountains, Orson and Caroline are still together, still in love, still living there happily ever after. Their story became a legend in Silver Creek, told to children and grandchildren, a reminder that love can be found in the darkest moments, that kindness to a stranger can change everything, and that sometimes the end of one life is really just the beginning of another. The town grew and changed over the years, but the Fletcher name remained respected. Samuel's descendants still run the blacksmith shop, now a historic landmark. Mary's great-great-grandchildren still teach in the school system. Jacob's legacy lives on in the rangers who protect the wilderness. And the twins' dress shop evolved into a successful clothing business that spans 3 states. But more than their professional legacies, what the Fletcher family carries forward is the lesson Orson and Caroline taught them. That love is patient, that kindness matters, and that the greatest treasures in life are not things, but the connections we make with other people. Every year, on the anniversary of Orson and Caroline's meeting, the family gathers at the creek where it all began. They tell the story again, making sure each new generation knows where they came from. They talk about the mountain man with his big heart and bigger hands, and the city woman who found her strength in the wilderness. They celebrate not just a marriage, but a love story that proved that even when you lose everything, you can still find everything you need. And sometimes, as they sit by that creek, they swear they can feel a presence, as if Orson and Caroline are still there, watching over their family, pleased with the legacy they left behind. Not a legacy of wealth or fame, but a legacy of love, pure and simple and eternal. The mountains remember them. The trees whisper their names. The creek flows on, carrying their story forward. And somewhere in the vast Montana sky, 2 souls rest together, their love story complete, their tears long since dried, their happiness preserved forever in the hearts of those they left behind. This is the story of Orson Fletcher and Caroline Preston, of a mountain man and the woman he found crying by a creek. It is a story of loss and hope, of grief and joy, of 2 broken souls who found each other and became whole. It is a love story, simple and true, and it proves that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply sitting beside someone until the tears finally stop, and then choosing to stay forever.